So now that you understand what 61B is, let's talk a little bit about how the course is going to be structured. Now before we get there, I'd like to talk a little bit about my philosophy about how learning occurs, because it really informs everything about how 61B was designed. So quick story time. Until I was 18-ish, I did not realize that practicing actually makes you better at things. And so here I have an example from a video game known as Dance Dance Revolution, where you must step on arrows according to a certain pattern displayed on a screen. And so when I first started playing, I was roughly as hapless as the guy shown. Now, up until this point, I really thought that some people were just good at some stuff and bad at others. And so it was a little surprising to me when I saw that with a bunch of practice, I was able to get from roughly where these guys are to pretty close to this. I mean, within spitting distance. Not quite this level, but I mean, not that far off, honestly. And again, like before this happened, I was terrible at sports, mostly because I was indoors playing video games all the time. But I assumed that was just like, my personal curse. Like, good at math, bad at all sports. Hey, that's life. That's not really how life works. So how do you learn? How does it go? Well, the way that I think about learning, the manner in which learning occurs, is that you don't really learn all that much from lectures or from reading. I mean, you get the basics, but that's actually only a small minority of what you learn. It doesn't matter how much you read about Dance Dance Revolution or how many times you watch someone play. It doesn't matter until you play. You're never going to get good at it until you do the work. And so the course is built around a pretty significant body of work where the vast majority of the learning comes from all of these other homework-oriented things. And there's basically two categories. The first category are discussion sections and what we'll call study guides. I'll describe those in a bit. And these let you build a comfort with the foundations of the course and often skew towards the theoretical. And the other type of homework in the class are the labs, the homeworks, and the projects, which are programming heavy. You're writing code on a computer, there's an autograder usually, and it gives you a sense of how the tools work, how one should program, how Java syntax works, and also gives you a deeper understanding of the nuts and bolts of the algorithms and data structures as implemented on a computer. Okay, so this is where you're going to learn, right? Watching me describe things, I think I do a relatively good job describing things, but this is where you're really going to understand things so that when you go to job interviews or when you're trying to build projects to modify the world around us for good or evil or whatever, or take exams, all of those skills that come out in those activities will have been developed through these types of homeworks. So let's talk now a little bit about course logistics, okay? Now that we understand how I think about learning. So I should say that this course, there's a lot of resources. In fact, there's more resources than you could really digest unless you took the class a couple times or TA'd it. But the resources out there, thankfully, are relatively organized. So in terms of the official course resources, we have our course website, which hopefully you've seen by now. We have our, we'll always have these meetings every week. We have lectures, discussions, labs, and office hours. And there's also webcasts if you prefer. Now it doesn't matter, by the way, if you're going to be going to lecture in person or watching webcasts won't affect your grade in any way. So be aware that those are okay. And then office hours, those will start next week. Now, in addition to our class meetings on our website, we also have our discussion forum. You've already seen that. And we have a mini textbook I've put together called Obscurantism in Java, and we'll explain what that term means when we get to it. And then we also have these optional or extra optional meetings where there are 5 student group tutoring sections, and we'll be starting those around week 3, and details will be to come. Now, all of these resources can help you build comfort and understanding of the kind of things we do in this class, but you're also welcome to use unofficial sources like Googling or Binging or Baidu or whatever for resources. Stack Overflow is particularly great. You can go to other programming classes on the web to see how did that person explain A star. Maybe it was better than Josh. Who knows? You can also go look at documentation for libraries or programming languages, and that's fine. The only thing we ask that you do not do is don't go looking for specific answers to the homeworks or labs out there. They might exist. I don't know. A lot of people have done them. And the course policies do clearly describe all of that. And I won't say much more about it now. However, I will say that if you sit there and just try and look at solutions out there and solve the problem by having an answer in front of you, it's kind of like sitting on the shoulders of one of these people and feeling like you're learning something about Dance Dance Revolution. I mean, you're learning a little, but not much. Now, in terms of logistical details, if you are waitlisted, well, in all prior semesters, I've been able to say with pretty high confidence you're going to get in. But I think this semester might be the first time we actually have to turn people away, and I'm particularly worried about concurrent enrollment folks. I'll try. Now, the reason this is happening is that it seemed like demand had kind of tapered off a little bit from spring 17 to 18. So during the first day of class, we went from 1380 to 1420 students, just a little bump. But this semester, we're somehow up to 1646. And I don't know how that happened exactly, but hey, great. I'm glad you're here. But because demand's higher than expected, we might maybe not be able to take everybody. Now, I have no power to directly enroll anybody. So what I'm going to do is, after Project Zero is over, I will take the information about how many people completed the project, and I'll go beg for more seats, and hopefully they'll give us those seats, but they might not. So what I can ask you to do is really try and do Project Zero, and if you can get that done, that's like a way for me to demonstrate to the powers that be that there's this many people who are really deeply interested. Week 1 sections, as you know, those are first come, first served, and same deal with labs. And you can go to whatever discussion or lab you want to in general, especially after attendance settles, migrate freely, and you don't have to worry too much about being overly full. Now, one important point, and this one's going to seem kind of rude and mean, but I'm going to ask that if you have administrative issues like what are my chances of getting in the class, or like I'm sick, what should I do about this midterm coming up, I ask that you should not email me directly with administrative issues. Instead, either post them on Piazza as a private post if necessary, or send an email to cs61b@Berkeley. And that will be watched by many TAs instead of just me. And the reason I say this is if you think that I handle just, say, 1 minute of response per student every week, times the number of students we have, that would be around 27.5 hours, which would be a bad use of time, right? I mean, especially if it's just some minor administrative stuff. Now, that said, I don't want to feel like there's a barrier between us. I'm just a guy. So please come to office hours, hang out, talk to me after class. All that's fine. It's just I specifically think that these kind of questions are not suited. But if you have questions about life or whatever else, do come by and chat. You can even email me about those. I might be very slow to respond to them, but all those kind of questions are welcome. It's just these administrative issues I really don't want. Okay. So that's some kind of eminently important stuff. Now, in terms of the way the class is organized, this is a new semester, and I've changed things up quite a bit. I have now what I'm calling CS61B 3.0. This is a new version of the class, and it starts off with Phase 1, which I've done this version of the class for a while. So Phase 1 is really well-worn territory, very similar to prior semesters, but it's a programming-intensive introduction to Java, where if you've never seen Java before, it's a great introduction to Java. And if you've never seen linked lists and data structures and that sort of thing, then it's also a great introduction. And I think there will be something there for everyone, and it's there to get everybody up to speed and on the same page so that we can then start talking about more challenging things. So this part of the class is going to have one browser-based programming homework, and that's called Homework 0. And what I mean by what I mean by browser-based is that it is all going to be done in a web browser as opposed to on your own computer. This homework, by the way, even though it is optional, you're expected to know everything that's on it. And in it, we introduce a bunch of basic Java syntax, like, for example, curly braces and if statements, else, while, and it's all stuff that I think would be incredibly tedious if I were to try and explain it. You already have done a lot of programming in your past, so this is your crash course in the very basics of Java, the stuff that translates really well. We'll also have 3 labs where you're going to learn how to use various tools like Git, which is a version control system, IntelliJ, our IDE, JUnit, our testing framework, and It'll be very tool-based, and that's only for this first phase of the class. And then we'll have 2 projects. They will be challenging, but not as big as our later projects. So project 0 will be like intro to Java, basically, and project 1 will be intro to data structures. And it'll be considerably harder than project 0. Now, once all that's done, we'll have a midterm right after these weeks are over, and that will bring us to phase 2 once that's done. So phase 2 is data structures, and this is the part of the class that will give you the most utility and the most street cred. Data structures is a funny thing. It is really, really important for programming, but it also has this interesting feeling, almost kind of like how Latin was back in the old days, that if you know data structures like hash tables and binary search tree as well, you're basically, it's a way to show off and say, I'm educated, I know what I'm talking about. And if you go to any job interview for the rest of your life that is CS related, it is quite possible you'll be getting questions about this part of the course. Now, this part of the course, it has a different flavor. So whereas before the labs were about tools, now the labs are going to be mini homeworks, or micro homeworks really, where you implement a little a basic data structure operation, like, for example, how do you build the add method for a hash table, okay, whatever that means. Now the homeworks, rather than having just 2 big projects, we're going to have some homeworks. We're going to explore the applications of data structures. So whereas the labs have you building the data structure itself, in the homeworks you'll use those data structures to solve certain real-world problems. And there'll be one homework that's a little smaller where we explore the properties of hash tables. There will also be a couple of projects in this part of the class. That is a very new thing I'm trying. So in projects 2A and 2B, you're going to build 2 different data structures, and there'll be no auto-grader that's going to tell you if your code is right or wrong. And we'll basically be really pushing you to use all those tools and ideas from the earlier projects to convince yourself that your code works. Because that's a really important skill, to be able to produce something and feel confident in it without having some external person to say, looks good to me. And once that's all rounded out, we'll have a midterm again at the end of the section, and the date is already set. Now, another new thing we're trying this semester is that for the last 2 phases of the course, the labs are going to be differentiated into standard labs, which are micro homeworks that cover kind of basic concepts, and then challenge labs, which are going to be way harder, and they'll be collaborative puzzle-solving exercises, so maybe you'll find those interesting. And you're welcome to do either of them in any given week. So you can get points for either completing the standard or the challenge lab, but be aware the standard labs will be easier. And that brings us to our final phase of the class. This one's pretty new, which is algorithms and software engineering. This is the new component to this part of the class. And in this part of the class, we're going to talk about, for example, various sorting algorithms. We'll talk about some little bit more graph algorithms. We'll talk about compression algorithms, that kind of thing. And in these, the labs will be implementing some basic algorithm, and the challenge labs will be kind of like before, where it's some clever puzzles. In this part of the class, it's mostly project-based again. There'll be one homework where you implement an AI that solves generic problems using A*, which is an algorithm we'll learn about in the class. And then we'll have 2 projects, the first of which is bear maps. And in this project, which is 2C, we're going to take what we did in the earlier projects, 2A and B, and use them as the heart and soul of a Google Maps-like application. And there'll be more to say about that later. And then, at the very end of the class, we will do project 3, build your own world. This is something we did new last year, and for now, I'll just say it's basically do whatever you want, subject to a certain set of constraints that you have to be building a 2D world with some set of physics. And I think you'll find it a really interesting and strange puzzle, and a good introduction to the world of how hard it can be to keep a system from getting so complex that it collapses under its own weight. Obscurantism. All right. Now, more logistics. So in terms of attendance, you are not required to attend anything, right? You can go to no labs or discussions or lectures. That's fine. However, we do want to incentivize and reward those of you who go to section and really need it in order to clear the hurdles of, say, trying to get a P versus an NP. And so what we're going to do is, based on your attendance at labs, discussion, or keeping up with lecture, you can earn pacing points, which basically say you're on pace and you're participating. And there's a somewhat longer story to how they work exactly in terms of number of points. But the summary is that it can help you get up to a B-, but it will not help you beyond that. So if you were otherwise going to head for a grade below a B-, pacing points can help you get there. So it's kind of insurance to get you above the B-, or to the B- threshold. And then in terms of labs, we're going to walk through now all the different types of homework. So labs are short micro homeworks, as I mentioned. They're going to be due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. And unlike the projects and the homeworks, you're going to get full credit for reasonable effort. So these should be relatively easy points to get, where there's not going to be some auto-grader that condemns you to debugging late into the night. Labs should never have that. Now, homeworks and projects, ideally you don't have to do that, but they will have stricter auto-grading. So for homeworks, we're going to have 4 homeworks with widely varying due dates. You should see the calendar, so it's not going to be some specific day like labs. And the homeworks will have a picky auto-grader that determines your score. Projects will be even bigger than labs and homeworks. And for the most part, we'll give you the auto-graders that evaluate the correctness of your work. But there will be that one exception, which is Project 2A/2B. Those ones you'll have to be in charge of getting confidence in. And in terms of solo versus group work, well, homeworks and labs, we're pretty free about how you want to interact. I mean, everybody should submit their own work, but we do want you guys to collaborate and talk about those a lot. But projects, for projects 1 and 2 in particular, we want you to do them solo. Now, that doesn't mean you need to do them in isolation without talking to anybody. And in fact, you can talk to other students in the class about the project. But what you should not do is, sit side by side in a group of 3 people and work through the project in lockstep, saying, hey, how you doing this? Hey, how you doing this? And kind of comparing notes. And the collaboration policy, which is longer than I really want to talk about in this video, does describe this in some detail. And indeed, you had to fill out a syllabus quiz in order to get your GitHub account, so you already know roughly how that goes. Now, projects 0 and 3 can be done in pairs. We'll be giving specific information about that when those projects are released. But I should mention that the projects in this class, particularly projects 2 and 3, are going to be pretty hard, right? They're very challenging, and for those of you with weaker programming backgrounds, they may eat your life for a while. So just be ready for that. Apportion your time wisely, and I'll try and get them out as soon as possible so you can maybe look ahead. But be aware they're going to be quite a lot of effort. Now, the projects will be worth a big chunk in fact, projects are worth more than any other single component of the class. In fact, you go even a little further than that, they do give you an opportunity for extra credit. If you finish projects 2 and 3 early, hey, you can get some more points. And then even beyond that, there are gold points you can get. And without going into too many details, there's some formulas on the website about how gold points work. But basically, if you go above and beyond on the projects, then you get these special points called gold points that have a value that increases the worse your exams are. So if you have bad days on the exams, gold points will be even more helpful than extra credit. Okay, almost done with points. So we now have weekly surveys and study guides. So a new thing we're trying this semester is having a weekly survey that is due every Sunday, and it basically just says, hey, did you go to lab this week, homework, or to discussion this week? Are you caught up with lecture? And we'll have special questions like, are you still looking for a Project Zero partner? That kind of thing. And it allows us to get a sense of how people are doing and for us to proactively reach out to you if you're having trouble. We'd like to know how people are doing, right? Because it's not fun for us to have someone get all the way to midterms and then hit a brick wall and we think, oh man, we could have helped. So this is hopefully going to help with that aspect of the course and give us feedback as we go. Now these are worth points, 80 total points out of your total score, and you can't turn these in late. But because I know these are easy things to forget, we will drop your lowest 4 out of 14. And then we have a funny type of work for the class, the study guides. So there are study guides for each lecture, and if you go to the website, you can see them, and these exist because students used to ask me, how do I study for exams? So I created these study guides that basically summarize what was most important from the lecture. Now I should warn you, you can't just read this and understand. This is like very compact, but it summarizes, once you already know the basics, what's there. And then at the bottom of them, there are often exercises, especially in the later parts of the course. Some of the early parts, not so much, but there are exercises where you can try and reinforce understanding of key concepts in that lecture. They come in C-level varieties, B-level varieties, and A-level varieties in increasing difficulty. And I should mention that the A-level problems are actually so challenging that I expect that many of the TAs will have a hard time, and possibly even I will have a hard time with them. So be aware that those are there. Now I bring those up now because the very best way that you can study for exams in this class, especially for phases 2 and 3, is to work through the study guide problems together with other people in groups. Discuss your approaches, and I'll have more to say about that when those exams are or when we get to phase 2, basically. These guides, even though we are not going to grade what you do or even really necessarily take stock of what you're doing, nonetheless, I think thinking about these kind of problems is really important. And in fact, whenever I watch someone else do a lecture, right? If I watch a lecture for another course, I basically am constantly pausing that lecture, trying to guess what the instructor is going to do. I will try and write the code the instructor is about to write. And I find that even though that makes watching those lectures take longer, it's more valuable to me in the end. And these study guides are kind of trying to capture that process of critically reflecting on many of the most important topics for a given lecture. The last and scariest way to earn points in the class are the exams. So the exams are closed note, but you can bring cheat sheets, 1 for the first exam, 2 for the second, 3 for the final, details on the website. And it's important to know that the exams are going to be really hard. So they're going to be around 60% medians, and I do that for one really important reason. If the median was something like, I don't know, some of you may have had exams in high school where if you're doing good, a lot of people would get like a 90%, but I don't like that because when it comes to these really challenging college level courses, there's a long way to go before you attain mastery. And if we give exams where the median is a 90, well, then you don't really get good feedback. All you know is that you're doing, and there's no way to tell if you're doing an adequate versus a really good job. And it's just a philosophical thing that I believe in. But don't worry, I've designed the grading bins so that you aren't going to get terrible grades. So just be warned in advance that when you get 60% of the points on an exam, you should feel great. You should not feel like, oh no, this is bad. I mean, this is a lesson in life, right? You will always be pushing yourself to be better, to achieve better results, and it's really not going to happen super often that you feel like, yeah, I totally nailed that. I pretty much, I'm good to go. And this class will be no exception. Now that said, obviously there'll be some folks who do, I try to get the exam so that there's a very small number of people that get all the points, but without an enormous amount of preparation, the right amount of preparation, and without just doing things super right, you should not expect to hit that very top level. Okay. Now I should note that if you do poorly on one of your midterms, because I know midterms are noisy, right? Sometimes you're sick or whatever. I mean, you have a terrible day before in your personal life, whatever it may be. I know those things happen. And so I have a policy known as supersession. Okay, I got fancy words here, where if your final is statistically better, as described on the course website, but in a word, like if you're way above the mean on one exam, but on the final, and you were way below on one of the midterms, it can replace that exam in a statistically reasonable way, and the website will explain how that goes. Now, that only replaces one of your 2 exams, and that also counts if you miss an exam. So if you miss an exam entirely, obviously you did very badly on that one. You showed 0 understanding because you weren't there to do so, and the final will replace that exam. So if you miss 2 midterms, then you'll be in trouble, and at that point, probably it's time to come talk to the staff about taking an incomplete or something, because something went wrong. Now, in terms of the exam dates, they are already set. The times are already done. They will be across a large number of rooms, especially the midterms, And so we'll give those detail once that gets closer. Now there's no alternate exams, and in fact, we're going to release the answers to these exams like the moment the exam is over. And as noted above here, there's a way to replace exams if for some reason you miss one of these midterms because you're sick or whatever else, right? Now there's one exception, which is that if you have a direct conflict with a final from another class, then we can work something out for an alternate final, but these midterms are set in stone. We have another class with a midterm at the same time. Hopefully they'll be more accommodating, but I've just found for reasons I'd be happy to explain later that I really, really don't like having alternative exams in this class. It causes enormous headaches and chaos, and I'll leave it at that. I should mention one not written on the slide. Exception 2 is that if you can take the exam at the exact same time, proctored by somebody that works for UC Berkeley in an administrative capacity, which is typically because you're traveling for official university business, then in that circumstance, often we can get remote proctoring going. So if you can be remotely proctored, then basically I'm counting it as you are taking the exam. So I should mention that for those of the small number of you that affects. Okay, so if you don't know what any of that means, don't worry about it. But I will just mention out loud to you guys that that's the case. All right, almost done with logistics. Yes. So course grade, the breakdown is there are 3,152 total possible points, and your later grade is going to be determined by your total. In fact, you can go look at the grading bins right now. So these grading bins are on the About page, and you can see that if you get 2150 points, you get a B minus. Now, how do you get points? Well, midterms is 800, the final is 800, the projects are 960, the homework is 320 total, the labs are 192, there are 12 labs, none of which are dropped. Homeworks, there are 4, none of which are dropped. And then there's the weekly surveys, so you get 8 points each if you're a top 10. So this is the way you can earn points, but there's some extra credit. So we have extra credit if you do the pre-semester survey, the mid-semester survey, or the post-semester surveys. And you can also get it by turning in projects 2 and 3 early. So there'll be some amount of extra credit described on the website. And there are also the gold points if you go above and beyond on the projects, as described in those specs. Now I should mention these bins, they're set, right? So I set these before the semester started, and the way I did it was basically the department gives me some kind of guidelines about what the grade should be, and I built a model based on previous semesters that tries to predict how you will do, and I tried to be as generous as possible within these boundaries. And in addition, I didn't do it this semester, but in the past, I set a set of metrics saying what I think like an A minus or a B minus or so forth student should be able to do on those boundaries, and that trained one of my earlier models. So that's still propagating in now, though this semester I didn't explicitly think about that with these. But these point values, they're set already. Now, it is possible that they're too harsh, and in that case I will bring them down a little bit. So maybe it turns out that I messed up, things were harder than expected, the exams were crazy, so I may bring this down a little bit. However, I don't actually do that as much as seems to happen in other CS courses. So you should think about these point boundaries as pretty serious. They do change a little bit sometimes, but not by much. So the course, I bring this all up because it's not curved. Like the only thing that feels curvy is the way we do exam supersession, but that's only a relatively small number of the points in the class. And so I think you really should have the sense that you guys are all in this together, trying to build each other's understanding, and this is not some cut-throat competition to get the most points. All right, 2 more issues. One is lateness and mentor GSIs. So there's no late work accepted in the class. We don't have slip days. We don't have late penalties where you lose so many points a day. Instead, once the deadline is over, we just don't take the homework, lab, or projects anymore. These deadlines, you should treat them very seriously, but I do know that we are human beings and things happen. So there will be an automated extension system that you can use to request extensions in advance. Like, I'm traveling, I've got this thing going on, whatever it may be, right? And when we say advance, it just means any time before the deadline. So maybe it's I'm requesting an extension because I'm sick and I haven't been able to do as much work as I expected, that's also fine. Now this extension system, it will give you a small number of extensions automatically, and I will not give the details because I don't want you to think of them as free late days or something. And the algorithm's a little more complicated than just, hey, you get this many hours or days. Now, once you exceed the number of allowable automated extensions, you will need to talk to your mentor GSI. What's a mentor GSI? Well, during week 2, you're going to pick some GSI who's going to be your mentor. That could be your discussion TA, your lab TA, or just anybody else. And if you don't pick one, you'll get one assigned to you. And the mentor GSI is going to keep track of how you're doing, and they will reach out if they feel like there's some potential issues, like this person keeps requesting extensions, or this person is behind, hasn't finished the homeworks, and so forth. And, as noted above, if the automated system rejects your extension request, you will need to ask your mentor GSI. So this process, to me, it's supposed to mirror in some sense how deadlines work in the real world. So absent legal contract deadlines, a lot of time deadlines are kind of hazy and soft. Like, hey, could you get that to me by Thursday? And if you don't, I mean, it's not like you get fired, but you're just continuously irritating people over and over, right? So in this way, this is supposed to have that same sense that there's social pressure, that you should feel bad if you start having too many extensions. Now, this is a kind of crazy idea. I hope it works well. But the point is, I really want you guys to try and treat the deadlines really seriously. Like, when you look at this page and you see that the deadline for, let's say, Project 1A is February 2nd, you should think of that is the deadline. I need to get it done by then. And if I don't, I'm doing something wrong. Although, this is not the right deadline, so I'll need to fix that. But we'll fix anything in gray is subject to change in terms of the deadlines, because this is copy and pasted from the previous semester. All right, anyway. But once you see a deadline, once it's out and blue, you should take it very seriously. All right, last thing. So even though this video was kind of laid back and chill and much longer than the real one will be when we do it in lecture, I was trying to just cover every little detail because you can speed me up here. Be aware, this course is going to hit the ground running. For those of you with prior Java experience, it won't feel so bad. You've already seen a lot of the stuff. But for those of you without, it's going to move really quick. And once we get to week 5, it's just going to keep going fast. So if you have prior experience, don't be tricked into thinking this class is going to be easy for you. It probably won't be. Once we hit week 5, things will just take off and do new things for you as well. So be aware, there's an optional homework 0 that's already out, that you should already be working on, and I really want you to finish by the end of this week if possible. It's an intro to Java syntax, and you're welcome to work with friends however closely you'd like. In fact, I'm going to recommend that not only do you complete it by Friday, I think it's even better if you finish before your lab. And for some of you, that could be Wednesday. There's also Lab 1 and Lab 1 Setup, which are available now, and Lab 1 is going to show you how to use various tools and be ready for the class. And then Project 0, it will be released on Wednesday, January 23rd, and it will be due Friday, February 1st, which is only 10 days from the start of the semester. And it won't be easy, but we still expect you to finish by the end of the second week of class. Now, when I say it won't be easy, okay, for those of you who already know tons of Java, probably it won't be so bad. But it's a serious project. It'll take a lot of work, so be ready. And it's going to basically go through all the basic Java features we really want to make sure you know. And you will be able to work in pairs if you'd like. And so I'll talk more about that next time, or see the Project 0 spec. But that's it for logistics. So all of that really exciting logistics stuff aside, let's now move on to learning some Java.